So the monsoon, Mike, how would you describe the monsoon?
It had a little bit of something for everybody, I guess, right? You want a haboob here, you want a heavy rainstorm over here, you want a tropical storm. I felt like it had something for everybody this year. We did well. Not too many places got left behind. We did a lot of filling in with a lot of different types of events across both Arizona and New Mexico.
Right. So if you aggregate all of Arizona and look at July, August, and September, it was the 9th wettest on record, or 6th wettest for Arizona and 9th for New Mexico. And September for Arizona, in southern parts of Arizona, was the third wettest.
Third wettest for southern Arizona, 4th wettest for the whole state.
So there was widespread coverage. Now, New Mexico also experienced a pretty active monsoon season. It seemed, in terms of percent of average precipitation, it seemed to do even better than Arizona in a lot of places.
They did. New Mexico was on a tear right from the beginning, right from sort of mid-June through July. Arizona had a couple of fits and starts where we picked up right around the 4th of July. We had a pretty long break towards the end of the month. At that time, New Mexico was clipping along, and then Arizona started to have a couple more events. It slowed down in New Mexico. And then once we got into September, we started to both share in some of these tropical storms that were moving across the region. Kind of an unusual situation, or rare situation for Arizona, of incredibly deep tropical moisture setting up across the state and becoming fueled for some sustained heavy rain. All of them we looked at with a wary eye to see if they were going to influence our weather. Half of these in September have actually been players in our local weather systems here across the Southwest. That's pretty impressive.
In terms of total precipitation, we've had some stations across Arizona have record-setting or near record-setting by a wide margin. Phoenix tallied, I believe, its third largest or third wettest monsoon season on record. It tallied about 6.35 inches. Its average is 2.5. Prescott was the wettest on record. Its average is 8. It tallied about 18 inches. And Flagstaff was the fourth wettest. It averages around 6 inches, and it had more than twice that. Precipitation was pretty continuous. If you look at some of the maps that we've looked at, in terms of, there was on average rainfall event every other day, half the time, maybe a little bit less than half time depending. And the intensity for most of these stations was above average.
I don't know if we can remember back to last summer, but Prescott, Flagstaff, some of our higher elevation stations, and a lot of the mountain regions across Arizona had an exceptionally wet summer as well. And they either exceeded it again or came close to it again this past year. These are 2 wet summers in a row. And I think what really makes it the difference this year is that, if you remember the last summer too, Phoenix and Tucson had a terrible time with the monsoon last year. It was raining in the mountains almost exclusively, very little activity moving into the valleys. And this year was a little bit of everything. We had some rain events like Norbert in particular, which were actually valley rainers. They weren't mountain rainers at all. Very little rainfall fell across the White Mountains or even in the Sky Islands during that event, where all of that activity was down in the low desert areas. Then you flip it around, we've had some really good high elevation rain events where the valleys haven't got it. And then we've had events like Odile, which clipped the southeast part of the state, which just dumped a ton of water across Cochise and parts of Santa Cruz counties, both in the valleys and at upper elevations. So yeah, a bunch of different pathways of getting to pretty heavy rain across different areas.
So what do you think was sort of the climate background this year in comparison to last year?
We had good, decent moisture last year, but probably not a lot of good mechanisms to move
like winds aloft.
Yeah, shear in the atmosphere, large scale, disturbances like easterly waves or remnant tropical circulations to organize rain. And so you get in those situations, storms form on the mountains in a really soupy atmosphere and they just rain out. You don't see much other activity moving off into the valleys. This year we had so many different ways of getting moisture in different places and triggering thunderstorms, and it's just a nice potpourri of avenues to get precip.
Last year we didn't have the same number of tropical storms.
A fair number of named storms in the East Pacific last year, but they were very weak and very short-lived in duration. So this year, storms that would pop up in the East Pacific quickly go to hurricane status and then strength and then hang out, move around. The background state was just perfect. All that energy, all that moisture, all that the sea surface temperatures related to that, just a great environment. And having all of that moisture at your doorstep during our convective season down here, you just have that fuel at the ready at any moment. And, last year you really had to have very, very well orchestrated surges of Gulf moisture to move up in here to do that. And so here you didn't have to, the weather systems didn't have to be as careful, right? There's just so much more to work with this summer.
So the tropical storm's influence was mostly felt in September, but it's worth saying that the monsoon was pretty darn good prior to September for most of the regions.
I think it's important for us to sort of maybe pick this apart a little bit more. So that the contribution of the tropical storms is really what pushed a lot of places to average or above average. A lot of our stations and a lot of parts of Arizona, if we didn't have September on top of it, they would have fallen quite a bit behind in seasonal totals. Tucson, without that single contribution of Norbert, we would have ended up probably about 1.5 inches, 2 inches behind. Same with Phoenix, the White Mountains. They needed that to kind of come up and over. They had a lot of activity, but they didn't actually see precip totals that were super wet like we saw last summer. Then you go up even further north to the northeast part of the state, up at Hopi and Navajo, and it was pretty quiet up there. They actually didn't see a blockbuster monsoon season. The Four Corners actually is coming in below average.
But your point, I think, is well taken. It's like, even though the monsoon season was fairly good in a lot of regions prior to September, had September shut down, which it has in the past, it would have been we'd be having a different conversation.
Absolutely,
right now.
So it was the tropical storm activity, which we cannot count on in any given year, showed up in earnest this year and was a completely sort of different avenue of getting these contribution of precip totals in the monsoon season.